So everyone saw the big fireworks in Russia on June 1st. Those explosions were big, but the real detonation, the one that could shake the Kremlin to its very foundations, may be just beginning. So on that night, June 1st, Ukraine launched one of the most devastating and far-reaching attacks of the war, Operation Spiderweb. It was a coordinated drone offensive that penetrated thousands of kilometers into the side of Russian territory and destroyed dozens of warplanes. Now, that attack has completely shocked Russia. The Kremlin is beside itself. It can't believe this has transpired. But more than that, this has left Russia's military and intelligence establishments in total disarray. But that's not the real story. That's just a prelude to what's coming. The real story is unfolding inside the Kremlin right now as we speak. Inside the Kremlin, there is fear, silence, and blame, working together with suspicion to spiral out of control, to create a witch hunt. Because there's a looming question. Did someone on the inside allow this to happen? And since the attack, Russia's senior leadership has gone silent. And that silence is quite telling. Because June 1st marked the worst blow to Russian aviation since June 22nd, 1941, when Nazi Germany, the supposed ally of the USSR, betrayed the Soviet Union by launching Operation Barbarossa. So what's happening now inside of Putin's Russia? Well, when you strip away the censorship, the propaganda, the staged parades, you come to an undeniable fact. The Russian regime is beginning to devour itself, and it's happening fast. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a political scientist and a special correspondent for the Kyiv Post. I've studied and worked against the Putin regime for 20 years, something that got me banned from Russia, in fact, in 2010 for being a, quote, threat to national security. So what we're about to discuss is the truth, the reality that the Kremlin cannot admit, neither to its own people, and most certainly not even to its own self. But before we begin, I ask just one thing, one favor. Please like this video, and please subscribe to this channel, because it helps me to bring more people accurate information, the truth, about what's really happening inside Putin's waning dictatorship. And the truth, the more you dig into it, you will see, is darker, and the regime itself is actually much less stable, far less stable, than what it initially appears. But let's begin. So on the night of June 1st, Ukraine launched 117 drones in a coordinated multi-front operation that targeted 5 of Russia's bases, critical air bases. One of those bases was located north of the Arctic Circle. Another was located way off in Irkutsk, Siberia. It's 4,300 kilometers from Ukraine. It's so far away that it's positioned there to project force into the Pacific. And 3 more were located within the strategic heartland of Russia. 2 of them were actually just outside of Moscow. But these were not tactical hits. These were strategic strikes designed specifically to hit the core of Russia's nuclear triad. And what were the targets? Russia's fleet of long-range strategic bombers. These bombers are central to Russia's nuclear doctrine. They're able to launch cruise missiles across continents, including into Europe, across the Arctic, in the Atlantic, in the Pacific. And by hitting these bases, Ukraine didn't just hit hardware. They degraded Russia's ability to project nuclear and conventional power across 3 global theaters. And this is important for Russia, especially the one in Irkutsk, Siberia. Why? Because without the ability to project strength in the Pacific, where Russia seeks to pressure the United States and Japan, it means it can also no longer project strength to China, a country which is trying to impress, but also a country which it knows could one day pose a serious threat to it. But also, Russia now is challenged as far as it goes with its ability to project strength in the Atlantic. As you know, routinely, Russia tests NATO aerospace with their aircraft. And in the Arctic, Moscow has made a huge deal about the need to dominate the opening sea lanes there. But here's the kicker. Russia cannot replace these bombers. They don't have the manufacturing capacity. Many of these aircraft They were built in Soviet-era plants that no longer exist or are simply located outside of Russia's modern borders. So Ukraine's strike inflicted damage that Moscow cannot easily undo. These losses, they're not temporary. They're strategic. And in some cases, they can be permanent. So in a single night, Ukraine didn't just win a battle, it shifted the balance of deterrence. And the message is clear. Russia's long-range strike capability is vulnerable. The myth that is untouchable has been totally shattered. Just in a night, 41 aircraft were destroyed or heavily damaged. It's about a third of Russia's strategic bomber force. Gone. Just burning embers. That was Russia's strategic bomber force. So both Western and Ukrainian estimates say that Russia lost about $7 billion worth of equipment. But what is key and what made this operation different wasn't just what was hit. It was how it was hit. It was how this all unfolded. Because many of the drones, they didn't come from within Ukraine at all. They were launched from within Russia. Within Russia, they were assembled piece by piece. And they were hidden inside of sheds. They were activated remotely. It was all being done within Russia, though. In fact, one Ukrainian operation site, launch site, was within 200 meters of an FSB office. And despite being right next door to the Russian security service, there were no alarms. There were no interceptions. There was no resistance. This was not simply a military failure. This was a system-wide national security failure in Russia, involving both the military as well as the intelligence service. And what's the aftermath? What are Russians saying? Well, pro-war, pro-Kremlin Telegram channels are erupting. They're absolutely furious. But interestingly, that fury, it's not directed at Ukraine. It's rather directed at their own commanders, at their own intelligence services, and at the entire rotten structure that Russia today has. Rebar, which is one of Russia's top military blogs, said that, quote, this was Russia's Pearl Harbor. Only instead of Roosevelt, we have silence. Another pro-Kremlin channel put it bluntly. They said that, quote, the enemy didn't just hit airfields. They exposed our rot. So publicly, the Kremlin has said almost nothing. But internally, a witch hunt has already begun. Because in Putin's Russia, fear rules everything. When something goes wrong, someone needs to pay for it. And when no one takes responsibility, that means that absolutely everybody becomes a suspect. And to understand the fallout, you have to understand the Kremlin's internal war. So the FSB is the successor of the KGB. The Russian General Staff is responsible for the military command. And these two institutions, the Russian General Staff and the FSB, they've never trusted each other. And that's a rivalry that goes way back into the Soviet period. But today, it's far, far more dangerous. So for the past couple of decades, the past quarter of a century that Putin's been in power, they've been battling over budgets, operational control, and ultimately for Putin's favor. Now, the FSB generally sees the military as bloated, corrupt, and incompetent. The military, on the other hand, sees the FSB as paranoid, power-hungry, and way, way too political. But there's a key factor here. Vladimir Putin is career KGB. He is KGB to his core. So his instincts naturally lead him to trust the intelligence services over the military. Now, this long-standing rivalry is becoming an open feud. The FSB is blaming military commanders for failing to intercept the drones. And the military is countering by leaking that the FSB allowed Ukrainian operatives to function under their very noses. But there's another factor here, and this is the key factor. Both sides, the military and the intelligence side, they know, they understand that if there is a serious investigation into what went wrong on June 1st, it will be brutal. Because the deeper that anyone digs into this, they will uncover significant corruption. They will uncover the fake brigades, the stolen fuel, the radar systems that exist only on paper. And the generals have very clear, they understand that if the FSB starts pulling threads, those generals are not just risking dismissal. They're risking hard time in prison, or even worse. And that's precisely when survival mode takes over. And that's why the generals will lie, they'll leak information, they'll shift blame, and they'll almost certainly fabricate documents, rewrite timelines, and put all the pressure they can on their subordinates to give false testimony. Anything that is necessary to cover up their failures and to protect themselves. But here's the deeper failure. If your job is to protect Russian state, that is Russia's national security, this kind of internal blame game, it doesn't provide for the nation's national security. It doesn't solve the problems. Rather, it just conceals the decay. It doesn't prevent the next strike. Rather, it does everything it can to invite the next strike. So it is exposing weakness of Russia. By not punishing those who are guilty and ultimately protecting those who are powerful, they are going to worsen Russia's national security interest, as they would define it. Now, in regimes built on fear, that's probably not surprising, because ultimately no one is acting in the interest of the state. They're acting in their own self-interest. They're acting in their interest of protecting themselves. So, incredibly enough, in modern-day Russia, in Putin's Russia, accountability, which you would think that military guys or career law enforcement or intelligence would seek accountability for how this went wrong, they don't want accountability, because that could literally lead to charges of treason. If the truth gets out, that is dangerous for them, because they have been operating against Russia's own security themselves by, for decades, embezzling money and doing things that were ultimately not what their jobs were, but in their self-interest. Now, the good news, and this is very good news, is that for Ukraine, this is exactly what we want. This is a magical scenario. We have Russians turning on Russians, the security forces fighting the military services. The generals are blaming the spies are blaming the generals. And the more that Russia burns from within, the better it is for Ukraine. But for Putin, this is a nightmare. Because this is exactly how authoritarian regimes fall. It's not from the enemy fire, but from the paralysis, the lies, and the infighting that's been bred by years of fear. And the rot, it's already deep, deep inside the Kremlin. All Ukraine did was light a match. And by lighting that match, it could pose an existential crisis for the entire Putin regime. Speaking of Putin, where is Putin? So that question has been circling around Moscow's elite, because after June 1st, he disappeared. There was no public speech, no dismissals, no visible response. Putin simply disappeared. He ran away. Surprising? It shouldn't be. Remember, in June 2023, when Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was the head of the Wagner Group, he launched his armed rebellion. And Putin did the same thing. He vanished. Wagner made serious gains. Wagner seized a regional military headquarters and marched towards Moscow. Yet nobody stopped them. The military saw them coming, and it did nothing. It didn't try to arrest them. It didn't try to resist them. It certainly didn't call an airstrike on them, which would have been very easy for them to do. Why is that? What occurred? It's because Russia's security services, including its National Guard, the police, the FSB, the Chechen fighters who are supposed to protect Moscow and the Putin regime, the border guards, they all stood down. No one wanted to confront somebody who might become the next ruler of Russia. And that rebellion, it showed the world and Putin that his grip on power was far, far weaker than what it appears. So now, after Operation Spiderweb, we see this again. Putin is isolated. He's surrounded by people who lie to him. He's surrounded by people who fear him. And he's surrounded by people who hide the truth from him. Keep in mind, Putin typically only meets with probably 3 or 5 people a day, and it's usually the same small circle. So people ask, how is it possible that they didn't see the Prigozhin rebellion coming, for instance? Keep in mind, Prigozhin had said a number of times, extremely strong criticisms, one could say, of Russia's military leadership, namely the Minister of Defense. The reason is simple. Though that was everywhere in the press in the West, and it was everywhere in the news in Ukraine, how would Putin ever hear about that? He's living in a bubble. He only meets with 3 or 5 people a day, same little circle. They're all insiders, all yes men. And what they do is they give him the news they want him to hear. They don't tell him there's problems. They don't tell him that their personal corruption is causing them to lose a war. They tell him everything's going splendidly. They lie to him. And that's actually the most dangerous moment for any dictatorship. It's when the leader is blind. And the inner circle is no longer even worried about the leader as they are about themselves surviving. Their objective is, how do we survive? Not how do we do what is good for the country or for the dictator. Once again, this is all good for Ukraine. I'm not complaining. But for the dictatorship, this creates instability. And if you want some examples of where we've seen that, remember 1937. You remember Joseph Stalin. Well, what did he do? Joseph Stalin had the great idea to wipe out the Red Army's leadership. So when Nazi Germany invaded 1941, the Soviet Union paid a substantial price. And in the 1980s, the Soviets' failures in Afghanistan, there was tons of elite infighting that made it worse and worse and worse and harder to respond. And today, we're seeing the early stages of another breakdown. We're seeing a catastrophic military defeat. We see the power centers in Moscow turning on each other. And we see a president who's divorced from reality. He's uninformed. He's in his own planet. And now the population is increasingly aware. Thanks to war losses, the drone strikes, the economic decline, this is not just a simple military crisis. It's a Kremlin power struggle that all of Russia is aware of. And it's going to get worse. It's going to get far worse. So what's going to happen next? It's going to be thrilling, you can be sure. And that's why I hope you'll subscribe to this channel. And I hope you join me in watching the events that are coming. Because I promise you, very big things are coming to Russia very soon. Thank you for watching. And thank you, as always, for supporting Ukraine.